it's Black History Month for Staffline, and Kevin Harper and I are both here to talk about our lives in general and some of the issues and challenges that we've faced being people of colour.
Looking forward to the chat, Shan. I'll be feeling and finding out a wee bit more about yourself and growing up. You'll find a little bit more out about me. So, we both grew up in Glasgow, different parts. One affluent area, one probably a modern day slum. How was it for you? You grew up in the affluent area. How was it?
I think for me it was, I would say that coming from, my parents didn't come from anything really, and when they came to Glasgow in the kind of early 70s, they worked very hard and they managed to move to a place in the west end of Glasgow called Broom Hill, which is now seen as a really kind of well heeled area. At the time maybe wasn't so much, but we were the first family that were Asian, black, anything that moved into Broom Hill, and we stood out like a sore thumb. And quite quickly growing up, you could see that. I think the first one of the stories my mum told me, Kevin, is that the next door neighbours when we moved in, the first thing they said to my mum and dad the day they moved in, said, "You're not like it here, this isn't a place for you here." And my mum and dad knew straight away what they were meaning, but as I grew up, you started to face a bit more of it, so I'm dead keen to know a bit more about your back, how you grew up, because you weren't that far. It was about 7 or 8 miles between from our houses, but we had what I would say is, as you grew up, it was just racism was part and parcel of growing up in that area, and if it wasn't what I would say is light touch racism, is such a thing as where teachers would make a comment. Primary school teachers, I was the only person of ethnicity in the class. And there would be things that would be said by the teacher, you stood out, your classmates, you always knew that. But top that with, what I would say is just direct racism. So, you can imagine, I'm sure you will, through the 80s, we had, some of my earliest memories are skinheads outside our house, jumping in the roof of my dad's car. They were throwing things at our house, they were shouting racial abuse at us. And me and my brother, just young children, looking out the window watching this. The police were called, took the ages to come. Some of the neighbours kind of gathered round, the rest of them sat in their houses and let it happen. I remember my big brother getting walking to school, and a skinhead chasing him to school, calling him a black bastard, telling him he doesn't belong here. And my dad and mum telling my brother, you need to run to school and you need to run home, because we were both working. And some of those things just really stick in you. But that's a different world for me from what I can only assume for how you grew up then, Kevin. So what was it like for you?
Well, I grew up in what I would say is a modern day slum. Postle Park, it was probably the poorest area in Glasgow, and probably still is. I think when you look at the stats on the UK poverty list, that's always near the bottom, within the bottom 5, always over the past many years. So for me, it was a little bit different. I didn't have the skinheads as such. We couldn't afford a car, so I was probably fortunate enough that I stayed in a close. So six families in one close. I stayed in the top, so I had probably the furthest to run if I was getting chased. But no, for me it was, I remember going there. My first memory is my first day in Postle Park. Fighting because I was called a black bastard, just out the back playing as a 4-year-old, and getting called names, and for me it was that fight or flight mode. I think it's a little bit different from yourself. I was in an area where it was a really tough scheme where you had to fight, and at the end of the day everybody knew who I was purely because of my colour. So at a real early age you had to make a stand. You had to put your marker down, and whoever that was, and that's just the way it was. And that, when I look back in that, and I think, what, that's not right. That you shouldn't live like that as a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old. Going to school, and am I going to have to fight today? What am I going to come up against? And I remember one time actually in school, and one of my favourite teachers, Miss Gordon, her name was, And I remember walking down, we were doing an SRA, so
Yeah.
for the older viewers or older listeners, they'll know about SRA. And I was walking down, and one of the boys in the class called me a black bastard as I was walking down, and I punched him in the face. And believe it or not, the teacher says, "Richard, you deserve that," which for me was a shock. It didn't mean that I had to go and fight all the time, but I was 100% going to the headmasters. That's what I thought. But even out with that, you know, playing football or just playing, I had friends that, like you say, they would make comment, but it was just the norm, you know, and that's the scary thing for me. And it just being the norm is not good, you know. So I think for me it was very different. I didn't have people chapping my door or jumping on the car, you know. Obviously we couldn't afford one, but that was different. So for me, hearing that from you is like totally alien to me, you know. And I think for me, how that affected you, I can only imagine.
I mean, see for me, like that, those instances, you know, they're not. I'm just giving you some examples. It was fairly constant, and the thing that got me, you know, both my parents, they would say it's just the way it is. It was wrong, but it's just the way it is. And my mum, in particular, saying, no matter what you do in life, you're going to have to work harder than anybody else. Basically, you're going to have to work harder than anyone who's white, because you have to make your mark. You have to, you know, just if it comes to education, it comes to your job, whatever it is, you have to just work there. And that's drummed into you. And I think it was drummed into me. When you think about fairness in society, it's wrong, but it kind of makes you who you are, sad as it is. But you know, like I've you know, different backgrounds and some shared experiences, but you know, my understanding, knowing who you are, we're similar ages, and I've grown up with your name in the papers. You're a, you know, a really well known footballer in Scotland and, you know, and the rest of the UK. But that was at a time that I remember growing up and seeing, you know, in Scotland, and you know, in English football as well, that racism was prevalent. You know, this was in the grounds. This is not, you know, people are talking about it a lot more now. But back then it was just the norm, you know. And you were the first black footballer for Hibs.
Yeah, I was the first black player ever to play in the league for Hibs.
Right.
And I, believe it or not, I didn't know that until about 2.5 years ago, which even blows my mind that Hibs didn't even come and make a stand on that and say, by the way, we've broke barriers, we've broke ground in this. And that was, I made my debut in 1993.
Right. Okay.
So it's not really that long ago. You know. And that was difficult because growing up as a black player, you know, even before that, being probably one of the best in Glasgow. And any time I went to play football on a Saturday, I knew for 90 minutes I was getting racially abused consistently.
You knew what you were walking into, so...
Yeah, I knew what I was walking into, you know, and that's from the age of 10 when I started, all the way up to 15 before I went into full time with Hibs. So for the 5 years, you know, 5-6 years, I knew every Saturday that I played football I was going to get racially abused.
So you're mentally preparing, top of your game, top flight football in Scotland, and you're mentally preparing to get it tight.
Is a 10-year-old how that constitutes growing up, you know, and that's just a Saturday. That's not every day, you know. So for me, looking back on it now, I don't know how I survived it really. You know, I think I must have survived it just purely because this is what happens. This is what happens. You know, and even in my professional football career, getting racially abused and nobody doing anything about it. You know, the powers that be not doing anything about it is hard for me. You know, and that's probably, believe it or not, when I became a professional footballer, that's probably when it changed, when the whole thing changed for me. You know, I remember getting racially abused when we were playing our local rivals, Hearts, when I was at Hibs, and not doing anything about it, that game, in the club not doing anything about it, in the SFA not doing anything about it. And then a reporter phoned me and says, Kevin, I want to do a story on this because nobody's done anything. And from that very day, it made me say that no matter what happens, no matter what age live my life to, I'll always speak out about racism.
Yeah.
So that was the effect that had on me. You know, it wasn't the 5 years or 6 years of getting abuse from parents that affected me. It was when I was in the professional game that affected me really, really bad. And you know, for me, growing up as in the limelight, so to speak, you know, as in a really pressurised situation, probably very different from how you grew up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd say,
or how it affected you growing up.
Well, to me, it's horrible, isn't it? You know, I'm just thinking about the intensity of what that must have felt like. Actually, that moment in your life where that reporter's called you, hold on a minute, this isn't right, and then actually something clicks in your head. Yeah. And I think for me growing up, it was like, it's obviously not the same intensity that you would have felt, and you know, because of the connection to football, but it was all racism was always there and always has been there. But you know, growing up, going through my teens, you always knew you were different as a young child, and then you know you become, you know, older you get, you're finding yourself and you're really different. I mean, even at school, you know, you end up, you know, just really good friends, all different ethnicities and backgrounds. But the first couple of years at secondary school, you find comfort in hanging around with the people that are of other Asians or black or people of ethnicity, because you know you had a shared story, I suppose, with them, and you felt comfortable. And that I see now in my children. You know, my kids have grown up, and you know, all in their teens now, and that's something I saw it repeating itself. And I just, is it right? Is it wrong? You know, but the thing I'd always say, Kevin, is that when somebody shouts, because you know, a stranger shouts something in the street, and I know we've talked about this before. We've had, you know, racial abuse just walking down the street, no matter what. My wife, she's white, and she, you know, when we first started going out, she didn't believe that there was a bigger problem. And then as soon as, you know, you see me walk, somebody says something when you're walking down the street holding hands, she was shocked, you know, and it grieved, you know, made her so angry. And those types of instances kind of shape how you think about life, I think, and subconsciously, I don't know.
I totally agree with you, and I think for me, listening to that, you growing up with, you know, people of ethnicity around about you, I grew up really in a white world, because none of my friends were black. It was all white. I went to school and there was no black. I was the only black person in my school. So I lived in a really, really white world, if that makes sense, you know. So there was nobody that I could gravitate to apart from myself. I grew up with, you know, my biological dad died when I was 6 months, black. Grew up with 2 white parents, you know, and kids going, how are you black if your mum and dad are white? You know, at that time I didn't know my biological dad was black, so you know, I'm like, I don't know. And I always remember hearing somebody saying, you get genes for your, you know, your grandparents and stuff, and I just said to stop the embarrassment. I just said, my granddad's black when he was white. You know, so for me it was a real white world, and not being able to understand or comprehend that situation, you know. And I grew up, as I say, in a white world. But all of a sudden, I think you get to a point, and that point was when I get racially abused. You take a step back and you go, you know what, I'm black, I'm proud to be black, I'm not going to hide anything. I don't know whether that's because you get older, you know, you're less fearful, but when I think about it, I was 18 at the time, so it took me 18 years of abuse, of derogatory comments, to understand that, you know, wait a minute here, I'm proud of this, I'm proud of how I am, you know. And that's the scary thing for me, you know. My kids are grown up just now, and I've said before that the biggest issue that I have is that I've put a burden on them because of their colour, because I know that, like you said, they're going to have to work harder than the white person to get an equal opportunity. They're going to have to be racially abused throughout their life, you know. And when you think of that, you know, you take a step back and you think, the kids have got a burden because of me, not because I've been brought into this world, but because of my skin colour. You know, and for me that's wrong. And
you know, when you bring children into this, both of us are fathers, and I think that's so key, you know. And I felt the world was getting a better place, you know, and I thought things were getting better. I'd grown up, and there was 2 key moments, I would say, in my life. And the first one was, to me, well, maybe we'll talk about this in a bit more detail, but was, you know, murder of Stephen Lawrence and the lack of action after that, and the profound effect that had on me as an individual, going, you know, both of us are similar ages to Stephen Lawrence would be now, and watching that whole story uncover over the years, but particularly at the start, it showed you that there was really bad people out there that would go for you, because just purely in the colour of your skin, and also the lack of action by the police and as society in general at that time. That's a big one for me. And the second one is, when you bring your children into this, you know, my thinking the world was a better place as my kids were going through school, and then they're in secondary school, and then the stories keep coming out. You know, this has happened, that's happened, somebody's called them that, somebody's called them this. And it just became part of their day-to-day life that they were getting racially abused as well in school. And one stands out that one of my sons was walking to football training, and a car drives past and somebody shouts "Yapaki bastards" at them out the car. And he came back home and told me this, and he just recounted the story, but emotionally he didn't even flinch. He says, "I'm used to it, I get it all the time." And to me that was one of these moments going, that's not that long ago. And somebody's felt this hatred towards him, walking down the street, and decided to shout out a window. He was 14 at the time.
Yeah,
so,
well, I've got a story as well. My daughter, who's white, because my wife's white, and my son's darker, which it's pretty crazy, because my oldest daughter's dark, my middle daughter's white, my son, who's third, is dark, and my youngest is white.
Right, okay.
So I've got 3 girls. So the two the middle one and the youngest are white, and the other 2 are darker. So my middle daughter's taking a TikTok, as they do, with my son, and posts it, and somebody gets back to her and goes, "Oh, I didn't know your big brother was black." And I'm like, "No, it was. I didn't know your big brother was a Paki." Wow. You know, my son was 4 at the time, so already at 4-year-old, he's getting racially exposed to that. My daughter, who was 11 at the time, didn't know what to do. So let that sink in. You know, as a white person, my daughter's getting racially abused because of her brother at 4. My 4-year-old's getting racially abused. You know, we're in Black History Month, which for me is a stamp, because we're saying that because you're black, you only get 1 month. So that's another stamp that we get, instead of going, you know what, every month should be Black History Month, just the same as it's White History Month. You know, let's celebrate everybody, not blacks, not whites, not separate it. Let's do it together. You know, and until we do that, that's going to, the Stephen Lawrence thing is always going to be there. You know, and that's the unfortunate thing. You look at society just now, and like you say, I genuinely believe probably late 90s, maybe early 2000s, racism sort of took a turn for the better. There was less of it, but I certainly think in the past 15 years, I think it's got worse. Yeah, listen,
I 100% agree with that. The world felt like it was a better place at the early part of this century, and you know, and it was less noticeable, you know, because you know, honest, comments stopped. You know, it was just everything sort of, and I thought, wow, the world's getting a better place. And then, as you say, more recently, and maybe this is just the way society is going, you know, with populist politicians, maybe an anti-immigration stance, I'm not sure. Or I'm going to be even more brutal, Kevin, is that, you know, there's more people of colour in the country now than there ever was, purely because of immigration and you know, and people have more kids, you know, and it's like, and incidents like September 11th, and it just did, and the London bombings, people have, you know, the comments started to come back, things started to happen. I was accused of being a bomber, and you know, you're a terrorist, somebody shouting, you're an effing terrorist as you walk down the street. And I just felt that things were starting to get worse. And here's something that I notice, is that maybe generationally, maybe this is something I know, generationally, our age, okay, we're fathers, and there's, you know, we don't teach our kids these things, right? And I would like to think that most people don't, but children are growing up with it. And is it social media, is it something else out there that's generating this feeling of hatred towards people of ethnicity again?
I think there's many things, Shan, in my belief. I think if you look at business, you look at sport, if I say to you, in business who at the very top level is black, that you can look at as a role model, or you can go, well, I can reach that point. You know, in sport I look at it and go, who's at that level? I couldn't really tell you anybody off the top of my head. I would probably need to go and do a little bit of research and go, oh, I know that person or that person. And I think until that happens, you look at Scotland, the educational system, not one black head teacher, not one in the educational department. You know, you look at politicians, how many black or ethnic politicians is there? Very few. You know, you look in the corporate world, even our company, you know, very few. You know, and although there's more black and ethnic people coming into our country, I definitely think, and the sign that tells me that racism is on the way back is because they're staying in their own areas, if that makes sense. You know, so there's maybe an area where it's synonymous with black or ethnic, you know, they're staying in the areas, you know, it's almost like a group mentality. I feel safe, so I'm going to, you know, go to that place, rather than the expansive Glasgow that used to be actually, you know, of I'm going to stay here, there and everywhere. And although there's more black and ethnic people in Scotland, I see very few in certain areas, very few. And even when I go to get the train after work, you see very few as well. You don't, and it's not it's almost like I need to get to where I'm going quickly in case something happens. So there's an undercurrent, I always feel. I feel that there's an undercurrent of racial abuse just waiting to come out.
And you know, I think the depth of that is quite clear what you're talking about, Kevin. It's that fear, a fear of what the future holds, and that does worry me. It worries me as a father. It worries me as somebody who, you know, I know you have similar mentality of, you know, the community around us, the people around us, you know, and supporting those people, and what lies ahead for not just Scotland, for the rest of the people in UK. Where's the inspiration for us, for us in work and sport and family life, you know? And if you think too deeply about it, it actually makes me really sad.
I think for me, anytime I speak about racism, I'm always a little bit into myself after it, because it probably takes me to places where I don't want to go. You know, in my mind, in that compartment, I've compartmentalised a lot of racism, the majority of it. But you have to delve deep into get these stories out, and I think that's, for me, is the effect that it has. You know, the effect on me as a person, the effect on my family, you know, and the effect on the belief that things can change.
You know, you talk about that, about change, but you know, it's that some of these stories and examples that are in my head, I don't like bringing them back out. You know, it's not like something that just rolls off your tongue. And some of them are in quite deep. You know, it's hard going. You know, and I look at, you know, we started off talking about our backgrounds and you know, and how different they were in the same city, but the struggles that my parents had, you know, coming to the UK, and the stories that my mum and dad used to tell me, but they just normalised it, you know. And if I talk to my mum and dad, my dad passed away a number of years ago, but I talked to my mum about what life was like, it's just normal for her. And the sad thing is, for me, a lot of my experiences just became normal for me. It's only when you hear your child or children experiencing that, that's not fair, and then you see others experiencing it, and then you have to do something about it. You know, you feel like you've talked, you know, a very vocal and well-known critic about racism in sport, and somebody has to do it. And when we think about workplaces as well, you know how you're key speaker in the sporting environment, and I think about in work, you know, how it's felt for me, you know, growing up in recruitment, really, you know, been in this industry for over 20 years now, and I've got to say, you know, hand in my heart, I've experienced racism and through recruitment. From what we would call customers or clients. I know from a candidate perspective, I know that you know, look at my name, it's Shan Saba. I've recruitment. I've made it simple for the benefit of recruitment. My real name is Mahind. Full name is Mahind Nadana Saba Pathi. It's a mouthful, right? But in this industry, you couldn't imagine leaving somebody a message or a phone call with that full name. So it was all being shortened for the benefit of making it easier for everybody else, not myself, but everybody else. What the positive thing I would say about working in recruitment is that it really is a meritocracy for me anyway, because as a biller, as a 360, starting my career, people saw through the colour of me when they could see, and I just mean when the figures are on the board, because that's how you get on. And to me, having worked in other sectors before I joined recruitment, it was always there. I worked in retail, I was a manager, it was my colleagues, it was the staff, it was the first thing that was brought up, and I was getting called names under the sun, but in the name of banter. But it really didn't really happen in recruitment when you start, moving on and then start growing. How do you think we fix it? How do you in your words or your thoughts think we can make change? I think there's in work, in employment and in society, that you can't separate them. It's attitudes, and if everybody's the same, this is an old adage, isn't it? If everybody's the same, nothing will really ever change, and people's mentalities have to change. So I think, you look at the key figures. You mentioned this about politics, and you think about what's going on in politics just now in the UK government. You think there's key people of Asian heritage there, but they've all come from their parents have worked very hard, come from nothing, but they've all come from really privileged backgrounds and gone to the best private schools and all that type of thing. So will that really inspire the next generation in politics or in business? How do we make it's all good talking about it, how do you make it better for everybody else? And I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm getting carried away, but finally the UK is not just black or white, and it's everything in between. And we have citizens from all over the world, particularly from all over Europe as well. And it's acceptance that we are a much more diverse nation than we've ever been. But it's been a nation that's been built on immigration for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So if we can get that, and that everybody's different, and that we are all different, I think that's the first step to trying to make it a better place. I don't know what you think about that.
I think for me that no matter what way you look at it, black and ethnic people have to work harder to get to the very top of anything, and even women. I think for women, I think it's changed drastically. I think it's actually changed quicker than what it has for black and ethnic, because in that short period of time where there was outcry, rightly so, about women in the workplace, you see more women. I look at sport, I look at football. There's probably more women in commentating in football now than what there certainly ever has been. And there's probably still the same amount of black. It's probably went up slightly, black or ethnic. But I think for me, until there's equal opportunity and there's not institutional racism, because I think many businesses are ingrained with institutional racism and unbiased biased racism, or subconscious racism. And I think until we actually open that up and we start to see black and ethnic people being promoted, getting to the top jobs because they're good at it, not because of their colour. Nobody should get a job because of their colour. And that, I think that's the biggest thing. I spoke to a friend just the other day, and she was saying that she got promoted, but people were saying that she got promoted because they need a black or ethnic person in that role. You've got good calibre for that because you're in the position, but you're black and ethnic. And she's saying, no, I got promoted because of the job that I am doing, or I have done, and I can do that. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. Until there's equal opportunity and people actually look at the person for the job that they're doing, not the colour of their skin, then we'll always be back at this.
Nobody wants to be promoted because of the colour, their sex, their sexuality, whatever it may be. You want to be promoted because they're the best person, isn't it? You're absolutely right. And I think that's where does it get, if we develop in workplaces and things are changing, I think personally, right, the first thing is addressing it and having conversations like this. talking about openly about gender, about sexuality, about everything, because it all goes together. And once you talk and address these, I suppose, can be difficult conversations, or listening to it, it can be quite painful, but understanding how difficult things have been for other people, that's the first step.
I think the biggest thing for me is people are scared to talk about race and racism because they feel as if they're going to offend. And I think that's a big issue, but if you don't, it can be almost as big an offence. I would rather somebody talk to me and make a mistake that I can say, well, what you said probably wasn't right. People would take that as a racial comment rather than say nothing. Because if they say nothing, they don't learn anything. And there's always going to be an elephant in the room. I talk about this when I talk about racism in sport. If the powers that be don't want to change it, we're always going to come back to the same point. I've been talking about racism in sport for nearly 30 years, and nothing's changed. Nothing's changed because we don't have a dialogue on it. We don't have, this is what we're doing. We don't have, big punishments for people that are racist, or make racist comments. But I know that maybe sounds a little bit contradictory from what I'm saying, but these are people in a sporting industry that are just talking or saying to fans, or fans are shouting at players, or players are, but in the workplace, if you're in conversation and you make a mistake, I would rather redirect you to the right phrase rather than you not saying anything. Because that's the only way we can move forward.
I agree. And probably a good way to finish this is don't anything is, don't be afraid to talk about anything. Be open about it, and be open to making mistakes and not being construed the wrong way or seen as being racist. And ask and talk to people about it, and then it becomes a much more comfortable topic and a lot more open.
I think just before we finish, I'll look at it and I'll make an analogy here. If I'm in a room as a white person with a black person, somebody with ginger hair, and a woman, and I go home and I speak to my wife and I say, I had a meeting, and she's like, who was there? And forget their names, but there was a black guy, there was somebody with ginger hair, and there was a woman in it. That's not racist, because you're describing people. But people would rather go, I don't know, rather than just say it out. And to me, to you, and that's the way that I would say, like you say, if we don't talk about it, we can never change it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kevin.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.